Welcome, everybody, to Inside Boxing Daily on the Gruely Truth Sports Network. Inside Boxing Daily, as always, is brought to you by the Retired Boxers Foundation with Jackie Richardson and Alex Ramos. As you can tell, it's been a while since we've done this show, Jeremiah. I forgot everything I was saying. But I'm your host, Mike Goodpaster, and I'd like to welcome in my co-host, Jeremiah Preisser. How you doing, Jeremiah?
I'm always good, man. Whenever I have a platform to talk boxing with you fellas, it's always a good night. So let's get this ball rolling, man.
All right, and we've got a special guest who you can hear, well, I don't know when you can hear any of us anymore since there's not a whole lot to talk about, but you can check him out on YouTube, Montero on Boxing. Help us welcome Michael Montero to the show. How you doing, Michael?
Doing well. Good to be back on the show. It's been a long time, so I wish we had more to talk about, man. You know,
yeah.
Crazy times we're living.
We could just talk about how on our boxing show before the Fury-Wilder fight, one of us picked Tyson Fury by a 7th-round knockout, couldn't we, Jeremiah?
Who was that man?
I believe that was me, and I believe that man got like really good odds on a small bet and made off really good that night. But let's talk about it. There's not a lot to talk about, so we're going to talk about not having a lot to talk about. And we don't know how long this is going to last. But let's say, I think best case scenario, maybe everything's going again by June. How does this affect the boxing schedule, Mike?
Well, I've been on the phone with several promoters, a couple of trainers, fighters, and commission officials over the last few weeks. You know, we're starving for news, right? So, like, I'm trying to find news anywhere I can, and I'm talking to a lot of folks, but they want to keep everything off the record. What I can say on the record is that what most of them seem to feel, at least for the American promoters, is that June, maybe probably more like July, it's going to be smaller club shows. Remember, I think Shakur Stevenson had a fight scheduled in New York. That got scrapped. Michael Conlon had a fight. That got scrapped. There was a PBC card in Oxon Hill, Maryland. That got scrapped. Those kinds of shows are probably coming back in June, July. As long as everything is over with this, you know, with these shutdowns, April 30th, that's probably what we're going to see. The big fights here in the States, you're not going to get those until at least September. And unfortunately, look, Top Rank wanted to do 2 pay-per-views this year. PBC wanted to do about 4 of them. I don't know how they managed that, but they're going to have about 4 months to cram all those pay-per-views in. Something's going to have to give somewhere, you know?
Well, how about this, though? Can you really do that with what this economy is going to look like by that time?
Yeah, that's the big thing, you know, is will they take that into consideration? And I've asked a few people about that. They said that it is something that they've discussed, but in the end, I don't know. I mean, if you can't sell tickets to fight, you know, we don't know how long it's going to be before fans can actually go to arenas, to go to stadiums. You think about a Las Vegas fight. Let's take Fury-Wilder 3, that 3rd fight. A big part of that is dependent on the gate. They need a big gate for that. That's why it's in Vegas. You know, Canelo and Golovkin, that 3rd fight, that's going to Vegas. So you got to do a big gate for those events. If they can't do that, then they're going to depend even more on pay-per-view revenue. But if you're charging $80 for a pay-per-view and everyone has the capability nowadays to basically stream shit illegally, I don't know how they're going to make any damn money. Something has to give somewhere. They're going to have to either discount the pay-per-views, discount the tickets, or both to make any money.
Yeah, and I think to go off of that, what's this do to DAZN? I mean, they're trying to keep guys paying $20 a month, and they have no content right now.
Yeah, the worst people right now for DAZN are the people that did the 12 months for, I think, what is it, $99 or something. I mean, that is the best deal probably in all of boxing, you know, as far as, you know, television programming. It was anyway up until this year. But people that are going month to month, they can cancel any time. But if you ordered that 12-month deal, what happens for those people? Are they going to get an extra 2 months tacked on? If so, how does that affect DAZN's bottom line? They had a decent first year. They had upwards of 800,000 subscribers toward the end of 2019. So they had a decent first year at it, but they were trying and hoping to build on that this year. And obviously they're losing subscribers right now. So I don't want to, be alarmist. I'm not going to say that this could take them under. They have a long-term plan. I mean, they're planning way down the road, years down the road. But this is an, unforeseen circumstance that it's got to be killing them. ESPN Plus, they have so much shoulder programming, and they have other sports. They have all the 30 for 30s, the documentaries. I actually think ESPN Plus is going to be fine. A lot of people get a deal through their Disney. I can't remember what the Disney app is, but I think there's a deal with the Disney app. You get ESPN Plus cheaper or something.
Yeah, you
ESPN
get Disney, Hulu, and ESPN Plus all together, I think, for one price.
Yeah, so ESPN Plus is going to be fine. Like, they're going to be absolutely fine. But DAZN, this is killing them. This has got to be killing them. And for the life of me, one huge mistake DAZN has made, and I've said this multiple times, they have no shoulder programming. The stuff that they do have is pretty shitty. It's just not very good. And they're an app, right? They're an app. And all they do is boxing programming. I understand that they have a couple other sports, but in the United States, they're known as a boxing programming app. They need to bring on podcasts. They need to bring on shows. Right now, YouTubers and podcasters are what's carrying the boxing community right now. That's who's providing content to boxing fans. And DAZN had an opportunity, I think, to pick up some people from that world. And if you think about it, that target, that's their target demographic, is young people that use apps and technology and, listen to podcasts. I think they made a massive mistake by not picking up on some of that stuff, because that could be carrying them through right now.
Yeah, so let me inject myself real quick. So what you're saying, Michael, is that John Skipper needs to be listening to this program or your program and getting us on DAZN and actually talking about some boxing. Is that what you're saying? He needs to hire us?
Jeremiah, listen, man. I mean, hey, I ain't going to use my name. We'll just use the grueling truth, right? You guys, your show. You guys have a dedicated show that you talk about boxing. You talk about boxing history. You guys have fighters on, former fighters. You guys have a following, right? And it's a podcast. It's an app. If people listen to it on apps, it just makes too much sense. They could pick up a show like your show, this show right here, for pennies on the dollar of what they'd pay somebody like Teddy Atlas or somebody like that, who really doesn't do a boxing show for diehards. And that is what would carry them through at a time like this. And to me, it's a massive blown opportunity, bro.
Yeah, I hear you. And it's, again, I know you're being modest right now, but they could pick, because the content you alluded to just a minute ago, their shoulder stuff is like, I've seen some of it. I mean, I'm watching DAZN and I'm just thumbing through some of the stuff, and it's some guy talking about sports, and I don't know who the hell he is, what his background is. To me, the guy is a mystery. I'm not saying he's bad at what he does. I really don't know. It's just not something I've tested, but I just have no idea who this guy is. But I'm like, you could have, I mean, again, you're being modest, but they could put your show in there just as they could put ours, or the Boxing Rant, or one of the other quality podcasts that's around, and just stick it in there. It just fits with the content that they're producing. And again, it's hard to say what they're doing at DAZN. I'm not criticizing them too harshly. Again, they're these guys like John Skipper and others, they're getting paid big bucks to do certain things, but it just seems like you're saying, they're missing the buck here a little bit.
I think that they need somebody on board that, number one, you need boxing people, right? But you also need a younger person on there that understands the demographic they're trying to target. It's going to be difficult to sell subscriptions to casual sports fans unless you have a huge lineup like they had in the fourth quarter of last year.
They've got darts and cricket, Michael.
That's not going to cut it, right?
No.
I think.
Is there a darts and cricket podcast?
I don't know.
There probably is.
Probably.
There probably is. They are targeting diehard boxing fans, it's diehard boxing fans that go on to my YouTube or listen to my podcast on the 5 billion platforms there are to hear podcasts on now. And, if they were smart enough, some of these promoters are figuring it out and have some stuff in the works. And those are going to be the promoters that kind of get ahead and start to dip into that younger demo a little more. For the zone, man, look at what they're paying Canelo. Look at what they're paying some of these guys that are not getting a return on that investment. They could pick up somebody like T Street Controversy, you guys. You mentioned the Boxing Rat, whoever it is. Those you guys have dedicated followings, so you're getting diehard fight fans to buy in. And if you can only hear the podcast on DAZN, if DAZN becomes the exclusive rights owner or something like that, then that's going to help them keep subscribers during downtimes. Because let's also remember, man, it's not. I mean, obviously the whole COVID-19 thing is crazy, but the boxing schedule always has ebbs and flows. There's hot periods and there's cold periods. And what's going to hold people over during those cold periods is quality shoulder programming. That's where ESPN Plus blows the shit out of DAZN right now.
So now, not just Jeremiah cusses on this show.
Yeah, I watch Michael's show. He does a fair bit, especially when when that Italian blood starts boiling like a tea kettle, man.
All right, we have a question from a listener, and once again, you can ask us questions on Twitter. You can just tweet it out to us. You can direct message us, or you can hit us up on Spreaker. And this is from John Garcia, who wants to know what we think about Eddie Hearn saying that it's possible Joshua versus Fury could happen next still, Michael.
It's completely impossible. He's just talking shit.
I know.
The third fight between Fury and Wilder, that contract is lock solid. And it's not just between those two fighters, their teams, it's between the networks. That is tied up, and it was never going to happen in July. The target date has always been October 3rd. So that's still when they'd like to do it. So it's probably going to go down October 3rd. There is no way in hell that we're getting AJ and the winner of the third fight between Wilder and Fury in 2020.
All right, we got a question from Hamed. You know Hamed. I've heard him call in on your show before. Hamed wants to know how long guys who depend on boxing as a living carry on fighting full-time who don't earn the big bucks.
That's a great question. A lot of these guys, like Andrew Cancio, right? He worked for, I think it was the Power Company there in Southern California. A lot of fighters do that. Joe Smith, he works too. And that's a lot of guys are going to have to go back to work if this keeps up. Some guys have enough money in the bank where they're good. Some fighters have a deal with their promoter where they're getting a stipend, and that's enough to kind of pay their bills for a while. But, who I've been thinking about is the kids that wanted to go into the Olympics this summer.
Yeah.
Now the Olympics have been pushed back a year. And I'm telling you right now, that stipend you get from USA Boxing, it's not enough. Most of those kids live at home with their parents, It's not enough to pay rent even. So what do they do? Because, if you go pro right now, some of them who have big names, they'll get paid pretty well. But most of them, if they go pro right now, they're not going to make that much money either. So they're in a really tough spot. I just think a lot of them are going to have to go back to work.
Right. Jeremiah?
Yeah, that would be something, huh? And it's funny because I follow some of these guys on social media, and a lot of these, it's more than I would like to say, but I have noticed that there are a lot of boxers who are spending money they probably shouldn't. They're like, flossing their vehicles and flossing, chains and all this other stuff. And then something like this hits and I'm like, man, I hope you're putting a little away for a rainy day. But yeah, I mean, it is unfortunate that, we're not going to get the Olympics until next year. But I think they took the right precautionary measures and just in case. I mean, because we're all kind of playing it by ear right now. We're waiting for this to blow over. But, because of the nature of the situation, it's going to take months before we get back to something more normal. And what becomes normal? I mean, I've heard speculation that businesses may become more mobile after this, and I don't know how it affects the boxing game, but what I can say is, because if Michael's right, and we're not really getting any big time boxing until September, and we've already heard speculation about this, if somebody like Canelo jumps right into a third Golovkin fight, because that's the earliest date that he can fight. In a way, it will be a good thing. I mean, it's going to be tough because a lot of people, are in sticky situations when it comes to their job right now. I mean, you had a record amount of jobless claims. But once it finally kicks back up and people are okay, they start to get their job back, start to get back into the workforce. And I know the government, I don't have a lot of trust in much the government does, but I do think they're going to try to control the situation enough to where everybody is okay when we finally get near that finish line. But once we do, again, Canelo Alvarez going to Golovkin, hopefully, I'm trying to be an optimist here, they put stacked cards on, right? I mean, I suppose you could have a pretty good card every week after this blows over, but people are going to be dying. They're going to be starved for boxing. So hopefully we can get stacked cards, right? You don't just get Golovkin versus Alvarez 3. You get a solid lineup, but I don't know. I don't know if that's what you're going to get. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, unfortunately, from everyone I've talked to, I just don't know if that's going to happen. I think that they will consolidate some cards. So, I mean, like, let's take PBC, right? Their plan was to match Spence with Danny Garcia for his first fight back in, like, June, and then have Pacquiao fight whoever he was going to fight. I think they wanted Mikey Garcia maybe. And then the winners of those two fights is going to be Spence and Pacquiao fight at the end of the year, right? Well, now you can't get that. That's not going to happen. So do you jump right to the Spence-Pacquiao fight? Well, that would be nice, but that's not what's going to happen. What they're going to do instead is you're going to get Spence-Garcia in September, and you're going to get Pacquiao versus whoever he ends up fighting in Saudi Arabia or whatever in November. And then the two of them are going to fight next year. So unfortunately, some platforms are going to kick the can down the road a little bit. Now, you mentioned Canelo and Golovkin. I mean, DAZN really needs that third fight, and they wanted that this September. So I do think it could be possible. That is a situation where maybe we don't get Canelo Saunders, maybe we don't get Golovkin versus his mandatory, and they go right into that fight. It is possible. Then again, it's just as possible that we get Canelo Saunders this fall, Golovkin fights the Polish kid, the mandatory, and then those two fight Cinco de Mayo next year.
Yeah. So it definitely affects Triple G with his age and everything going on there. Big
yeah, I mean, and him not fighting and not being in rhythm, I think that's going to affect guys like him. Golovkin's one of those guys who kind of needs to be in rhythm. When I say rhythm, I'm talking about his training rhythm. He already had an injury earlier this year. He's had issues. So I think that's going to make that third fight with Canelo even harder for him, a taller mountain to climb. And then there's a lot of fighters that just don't stay disciplined between fights. And look, it's hard right now. All the gyms are closed. I mean, I'm trying to stay in shape. I'm sure you guys are too. And what the hell? You can only do so much at your house. You can only run so many miles, right? So some of these guys, I could see some guys are going to have trouble making weight. We might see some upset specials in the last quarter of this year because of this. It's very possible.
Yeah. On that note, though, it is a good thing that Gary Russell Jr. got in his one good performance of the year.
Yeah, he's just as active this year. He's always been.
Well, that's every year. And it's a damn shame, too, because he's a good fighter. And this is the thing. I hear everybody tell me about how all the old fighters couldn't hang with the new fighters, and I think that's simply not true. Just because I think it's hard, and me and Jeremiah have had this conversation with a lot of people before. We'll get your opinion, but I think, yeah, guys might be bigger, faster, and stronger. But I think the guys, when I watch film of the guys, or when I was watching it growing up, and the guys in the 70s and the 80s, I think they were just better rounded fighters just because of the activity, because I don't see how you can improve fighting once or twice a year.
Yeah, in terms of activity, those fighters were just in rhythm. They're constantly fighting, and it was okay to have exhibitions. It was okay to take, a couple of B, even C level fighters in between the really, really big fights. You're still fighting 5, 6, 7 killers a year, in between all those other kind of tune-up fights. They were just staying busy. Yeah, athletes these days, they are bigger, stronger, faster. There's better nutrition. There's better recovery. We have better technology. You have the benefit of having over 100 years worth of footage to look back at and watch and learn from. A bunch of lessons learned from, fighters making mistakes over the decades that you can go back and look at. All of that. But I agree with you, Mike, that, just being active is so important to a boxer. It's probably the most important thing. And for certain fighters, it's what helps keep them in shape and not, be turning into a fat ass. It's just being active. So a lot of guys today, their biggest problem, how many fights do you watch where the first 3 rounds are dog shit? Because both of the guys are rusty.
Michael, to tell you the truth, I think 90% of the rounds I've watched since this century started have been dog shit.
Oh, man.
I mean, seriously.
I'm trying to be an optimist. I'm trying to be an optimist.
That's the difference between me and you. I'm not. So, I mean, it's like, it just blows my mind to see this stuff. And, I mean, people think what they see is great. Like Klitschko and Joshua, yeah, it was exciting. But, I grew up watching Holmes and Norton. You watch Holmes and Norton, and Klitschko and Joshua is pretty damn boring.
I like Klitschko Joshua. That was pretty damn good.
First 4 rounds are boring as hell, though.
I hear what you're saying. I think that the big difference, though, today is, well, number one, there's not as many dates. I mean, back in the day, you had network TV, and there were more dates available. Now, you look at the big sports here in America, the seasons are longer. I mean, look at the NFL, right? Look at the NBA, Major League Baseball, all of it. The seasons are longer. There's more sports programming on mainstream, regular network TV and regular cable TV. So there's always so many dates. Also, boxing is more global. There's more fighters now. There's fighters from everywhere now vying for those TV spots. So fighters only getting in there once or twice a year, and they're getting paid a lot more now than they used to get paid. So for some guys, hey, if I can fight twice a year, and each time I fight I make a few $100,000, maybe, Uncle Al slide me some money under the table, spending money in between to keep busy, why fight more than twice a year? That's the attitude a lot of guys have.
All right. So what we just talked about, the question I just got, is just mind-blowing. I expect more from Hamed, but Hamed says, do you guys think the mythical matchup between Mike Tyson and Muhammad Ali was an overrated matchup, or are the fans right? It was a fight Tyson would win in his prime.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, man, it's overrated. I like Tyson. I'm not as hard on him as Mike Goodpaster is, but or Teddy Atlas. Teddy Atlas is pretty rough around on him too. But listen, man, I think Tyson was an ultra talented guy. He had hand speed, he had power, but there's a clear difference that I don't think needs illuminating over and over again, and it's that Ali had heart. He had a toughness that Mike Tyson didn't have. I mean, yeah, if Tyson catches him early and puts him down, yeah, I mean, maybe he scores a knockdown, maybe he scores 2, but what's the possibility of Ali staying down?
None.
What's the possibility of him catching a young Ali? It's just, to me, it's just clear as day who would win. And I don't even like mythical matchups. I typically don't engage in because it's a lot of guesswork, and I just think some people put too much emphasis on it. Like I know at the International Boxing Research Organization, we put out our all-time rankings, and I could see some guys they mentally masturbate too much about some of these mythical matchups, like like Frazier Creams Larry Holmes, and that's a given. It's like, dude, I don't know, but when it comes to Ali and Tyson, when you have such a clear line there with heavyweights, because to me, heavyweight's a pretty weak division historically. You look at somebody like Ali, who was tough, had pretty much anything you would want in a fighter. He wasn't a great puncher, obviously, but he had the intangibles. He had, things you couldn't teach, right? He had the heart, whatever. To me, it's just clear that Ali would win that fight. The only way he doesn't win that fight, I think, is if you put him in a EWBSS tournament for fight night, and he gets knocked out that way. That's the only way I see Tyson winning that one.
All right. Michael, does Mike Tyson have a chance here?
Well, I mean, he has a puncher's chance. Mike Tyson could win by knockout. If look, it could happen. I mean, everyone has a chance, but who would I favor? Obviously, Ali, but I try not to do the mythical matchup thing, especially when it's guys of different eras. Like, I did a video on my channel about who I think is the greatest heavyweight of all time, and I think I rate Lewis over Ali. And it's not necessarily that I think Lewis would beat Ali head-to-head. It's that, and maybe he could, who knows, but I would favor Ali, obviously. But I just think you rate a fighter based upon what he does in his era and how dominant he is, and also the contribution he makes to the sport.
All right, so
I think what Lewis did was huge.
Okay,
he was the first Black American sports hero. You don't have Jackie Robinson without Joe Louis. You know what I mean?
My question is this, though. If you look at the historical importance of Muhammad Ali with the Vietnam War, and really there was no big groundswell of people being against the Vietnam War until Ali really put it to the forefront. So I think with what Ali did right there is historically close to significance, because that was helping people of all races, because it's a war we shouldn't have been in. And when you look at the resume is not even close, Michael. Ali beat a ton of guys that were real damn good, and this is not Lewis's fault, just like it's not Larry Holmes' fault that his era wasn't that good. But I just don't see how Lewis can be ahead of Ali. And I have this fight with Buddy Gibbs all the time. So,
look, I hear you. Look, if you rate Ali number one, I am mad at you. I understand. You can. They're 1 and 2, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's just you can't have Ali without Joe Louis. Joe Louis paved the way for all those guys. And I know Jack Johnson was way before Louis, but Jack Johnson was not beloved, to put it mildly, when he was fighting. Joe Louis, what he did against Max Schmeling in that rematch, on the heels of World War II, I just think that is the greatest, most significant sporting moment in the 20th century, in my opinion.
No doubt.
When you look at what it symbolized.
Yeah, and the thing about it is this. I think the fights that you talk about that were like that are that one, Ali Frazier and Johnson Jeffries, and it's more because of political ramifications and how those things are never all going to happen again with fighters that good all at the same time. Holmes-Cooney was a huge fight, but not like Ali Frazier or Louis Schmeling, too.
No, but with Ali Frazier, I mean, that was, let's be honest, that turned into Republican versus Democrat, conservative versus liberal, somehow white versus black, even though there was two black guys. I mean, that was a political thing. And for, Schmeling and Lewis, their rematch, I mean, that's right around World War II. That was a huge, significant event.
I agree with you. That's number one by far.
Event. I mean, yeah, just those types of events, can we have something like that now? And then the difference, too, back then is you just didn't have as much sports. I mean, now every sport, I just feel like every game, it's so significant. Everything has to be blown out of proportion. This is so significant. This is so historic. Everything's exaggerated. We have a 24-hour news cycle now, and sports is no different. So I just don't think you can have those significant moments in sport anymore. At least they're just a lot more rare, where the entire world is talking about something,
Yeah, and I would add that it's less significant also because and I know, Mike, you and I have talked about this before, is it's not as personal a game as it used to be. I mean, like in the 70s and 80s and stuff, you'd take your kid to the ball game, you'd get them involved in sports. It just seems like there was people are more emotionally attached to the athletes than they are today. And like when you talk about the 24/7 news cycle and they're constantly masturbating to all these guys, that's one of my problems with boxing. And I know I speak for all of us here, because these titles and everything, it's like, look at Deontay Wilder's run, right? Before the Tyson Fury rematch, the PBC has graphics put up where they're saying he had 9 title defenses. He's, closing in on, Ali's second run. It's stuff like that that's constantly muddying the waters in boxing. I mean, it happens all over in sports too. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's just in boxing, it's more ripe for that sort of hyperbole because of the saturation of titles and weight classes, right? It's like, we also have this, to add on to that, there's this historical revisionism where the WBO was all of a sudden a major title in the 90s and early 2000s. When I followed boxing back then, it really didn't even become a thing until, from what I recall, it was a bigger thing in Europe, obviously, but a lot of people didn't take it that serious stateside because you had these European guys, who had the WBO title, like Nassim Hamed. He had the WBO belt. He came to the stateside. He ended up getting whooped by Marco Antonio Barrera. And so the perception was that he's not quite on that level. You had Darius Michalczewski, who had the WBO belt, and he never really came stateside. He fought some Americans later in his career, but he didn't really make that crossover. So to a lot of us back then, the WBO belt was just a fringe title. But now that the British are more involved in boxing, Europeans are more involved in boxing, you get some historical revisionism. Like the WBO, Joe Calzaghe had 21 title defenses, and this guy had this many. Right, to me, what people are doing is they're conflating alphabet title defenses like the WBO with something like Joe Louis did. Right? It's like Vladimir Klitschko. I liked Vladimir Klitschko, and if you count his WBO reign along with the other alphabet trinket defenses he had like 23, and so people are like, oh well, he's pretty close to Joe Louis. It just sucks in my opinion because we're getting that sort of conflation, and it's distorting history.
Yeah, I mean, for purists like us, it's annoying, right? I remember for the Wilder Fury rematch, I usually don't watch all the pre-fight hype stuff. I don't watch the stuff on just the stuff on the networks that they put out, because what I've learned is that stuff's not for the diehard fan. They know that the diehard fans are going to buy that fight or watch it one way or the other. Those shows are made for the casual fan, and that's why they conflate. That's why they compare Deontay Wilder's streak to Ali's. Even comparing Wilder's streak to Klitschko is asinine. It's pathetic. So, but we know that. But a casual fan sees that and sees them knocking out all these guys, and you're like, holy shit, I gotta watch this. That's who they're targeting with that marketing, and that's why every fight now is a title fight. How can you take it as this being this significant historic event if every damn fight has a title on the line? And that's a major issue, I think. Now it's not just titles, but it's interim titles in recess, diamond, platinum, copper, every damn metal on the periodic table has a freaking belt.
Yeah, they still got a few.
Waters it down. What's up?
I said they still have a few on the periodic table to go, though, so they're good.
Oh, they'll get them all, brother. They'll get them all.
All right, we have a question. Do you guys think, with HBO boxing out the door, was that a signal that boxing is a dying niche sport in America, however you phrase it, or is it evident that UFC has taken over boxing in America since the Mayweather era?
Well, I get asked that question about once every 5 minutes. I mean, look, boxing has been a dying niche sport for over 100 years. You know? So, but it is true that it truly is now a niche sport in the United States. People always say, what can help bring boxing back? It's never coming back. It's going to remain a niche sport from here on out. The biggest difference that I see, okay, I'm not a big UFC guy, but the biggest difference I see, not just from what my eyes see, but also like some of the trending analysis I've seen with the pay-per-views and like the TV ratings and that stuff, which markets are watching. The big difference is this. Boxing is a ethnic sport and an immigrant sport and a working class sport. So all races watch boxing, but let's stick with Caucasians, okay? It's going to be ethnic Caucasians. It's going to be immigrant groups, Eastern Europeans, Irish people, people like that, right? Of course, African Americans, Hispanics of all races, Asian Americans are watch boxing, Filipinos, now more Japanese with Inoue and guys like that coming up. But it's people in the inner city, lower income, immigrant populations, ethnic populations. What UFC has done an outstanding job at is they have marketed and cultivated a fan base that boxing told to go fuck itself decades ago. I'm talking about middle America. Suburban kids are watching UFC. White collar golf shirt wearing people are watching UFC. I'm just going to say white kids are watching it. This country is still over 70% white, and most of the white kids, they're watching UFC. Boxing just does not appeal to the mainstream fan base the way it used to. A big part of that is the way it's been marketed and packaged. And UFC probably is maybe marketed a little bit better in terms of, the short attention span, younger generation. But I just don't ever see boxing taking that group back. I think UFC has it, and they're going to run with it.
Yeah, and you can't fault them for it because it's not only a good demographic in terms of money, but it's a good demographics in terms of base. I mean, like you said, there's a large base for it, and not only that, it's the one thing I've noticed too is. Like with boxing, you can get into boxing for free. I mean, the gym that I go to does not charge you anything. It never has. And I've been going there over a decade. In MMA, if you want to get Muay Thai lessons or, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu lessons, it comes with a hefty price tag or something that I would label as a hefty price tag as somebody who comes from a boxing background. And to be honest with you, in Colorado, I don't know how this is translated nationwide, but how local gyms have adapted to the prices because, again, you can take these Muay Thai lessons for, $200 a week or, $400 a month or whatever it may be, but it's pricier than the bottom baseline for boxing is. And because of that price tag, you're making it so that the participants are by and large people who have a little bit more money. And that, of course, is like more middle class kids. But you're right. I mean, and the thing that I would add to it with the UFC is that the thing about boxing is besides promoters and managers and people like that, it seems like there's the UFC as a company acts as a middleman, so they can divert funds into a constant PR machine. Do you know what I mean? Whereas boxing, it's on the onus of the fighter, the promoter. I don't know how much promotion the managers do, but it just seems like because they have that UFC as a brand, they can just constantly market themselves like that. Whereas, Top Rank is only marketing their stuff when their fight is about to come around. So that's just one thing that I've noticed. And I'm not even a UFC fan. I'm a real casual when it comes to that. I mean, I think the last UFC fight I watched was, I don't know, GSP's last bout. I mean, I don't really watch much of it, but I think that's something that boxing lacks too. It's just we don't have that PR campaign that sports with governing bodies do, like the NFL, MLB, NHL, all of those. So I just think that's just another reason why we're going to remain on the fringe.
All right.
Well, who's the point person? There's no one point person.
No.
There's no one central authority that you can go to. The thing, again, the boxing and MMA comparison, they're really not comparable. If you actually go to look at UFC's ratings and you look at all the ranked fighters, like their version of BoxRec, you'll see boxing has way more licensed professional fighters than MMA does. It's so much bigger globally. You can't manage it with one promoter, one sanctioning organization. It's impossible. So UFC is a much smaller company, and there's way less fighters. There's way less athletes. So they have more control. 20, 50 years from now, if there's tens of thousands of licensed, registered, professional MMA fighters, well, that might change. Maybe then you'll have 3 different versions of UFC, and it will look more like boxing. But right now, it's just that one governing body, pretty much. I mean, there's others really small ones, but one major one, that's the brand. It's like when you think football, you think NFL. When you think basketball, you think NBA. When you think MMA, you think UFC. When you think boxing, there's nothing that pops up. You think of a couple fighters you like, and that's pretty much it.
I think of the way Tyson Fury blatantly cheated with his gloves to steal the heavyweight championship. And on that note, we'll go with the final question. I heard Michael talking about boxing media and the LDBC on his podcast, but is boxing the only sport where these guys from the YouTube community and the LDBC are capable of getting access to boxing credentials to fights ringside? I think the question is boxing the only sport that will let some jack-off with a camera that talks to it in to cover a fight or a big event?
Well, you guys work with a couple different sports, so maybe you could speak to this better than me. I just know that for boxing, because you have so many different promoters kind of doing their own thing, a lot of people that get credentials to fight, it's because they know somebody. So specifically with the LDBC, and I just had Peace Street Controversy on my show last week, Terrell Van, and he talks about this a lot on his platform, that the LDBC guys really kind of came up when the PBC started. And a couple of those guys were in good with Sam Watson and people like that, and they got access. And yeah, you could get it. And every promoter does it. Look, if you have, let's say you have a YouTube channel with 100,000 subscribers. Let's say you have a Twitter with over 50,000 followers. That kind of stuff is going to get promoters' attention, and that could get you a credential to a fight. You might be a complete moron who doesn't know what you're talking about or some race-baiting troll, but if you have 100,000 YouTube subscribers, certain promoters are going to look at that and say, yeah, I want that person at my event because there's no such thing as bad press. Yeah, I don't think that shit will fly in other sports.
No. I can tell you this, from covering other sports, like we covered Notre Dame football. To get credentials to that, we had to show them our Google Analytics number to show that we had 1 million hits on our website per month. For the NCAA basketball tournament, which we were credentialed for everything this year, but of course nothing happened. Same thing. We had to show them that we had over 1 million people on our website. And they don't give two shits with these other sports how many Twitter followers you have. They don't care how many YouTube subscribers they have. They care about how much traffic you get on your website because they want to know that you're legit. And then a lot of times they will ask you to send them something that you've written that's been published to make sure you're legit. With boxing, I think we've been credentialed for every fight we've asked for, and the only time that I've ever had any contact with anybody there would have been the PBC, which I think was Timothy Smith, which I've known Timothy for a while, and said that was no big deal. But that was just the first time we got credentialed. I called him, and he's like, oh, you got a website? I said, yeah. He said, well, yeah, we'll give you credentials. So, and I mean, with the NCAA tournament, to put it another way, when we put in credentials for all the first, second, regional semifinals, regional finals, Final Four, everybody got approved except for our reporter in New York. And I asked him why, and he's like, we never heard of you. So then I sent him the back-end Google Analytics number. 10 minutes later, we're approved for that one too. So that's the difference between boxing and other sports.
Yeah, with boxing, look, with the really, really big shows, like in Las Vegas, maybe some of the bigger shows in LA or New York, they are going to turn people down. And for some of the star fighters, they do turn people down. But there's so many mid-level shows, there's so many club-level shows, they're going to let anybody in there. I mean, if you have a boxing blog and you'll write about a fighter, some of these guys are so desperate to get any media traffic for their fighter, they'll let you in. And it's not a hard sport to get into and get credentialed for. What's hard in boxing is to get paid. Yeah. It took me years. It took me years of doing basically free work to get to a point where I started to get paid. And then, just recently getting on with the ring and everything to where I'm getting paid regularly. And then, look, I was with Boxing Monthly. We just found out that we're about to be no more. So another one bites the dust. I mean, it's getting tougher and tougher to make a buck. So if there's a line of kids with cameras that want to get into a fight and they're willing to go in there for free. And I'm talking, most of the people traveling to Vegas to cover fights aren't getting paid. I'm talking 90% of them. They're traveling there at their own expense because they're super fans and they want to take videos and write and post it, on their social media, whatever it is. And the promoters know that. So they use that to their advantage. And if they, if someone says, hey, well, I'm not coming unless you pay me, a lot of promoters will be like, okay, well, fine, screw you. Because there's a line of kids behind them who will come for free. So it's kind of a double-edged sword.
All right. Jeremiah, anything else before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I actually wanted to piggyback on that because I know Mike has talked about this at length. Obviously, I've known Michael for a while and, listened to his stuff and he's given advice. I mean, he's talked about how difficult it is to make a living in boxing, and it is extremely difficult. I mean, you can't, besides the Kevin Iols of the world, and I don't even know who else, but that's why so many of these guys are lobbying to try to get on these networks so they can get regular pay to, pursue a passion. That's why, John Skipper, you need to hire us and Michael Montero. Anyways, sorry, fuck, almost. But no, you have this. I've had this from writers. We've been covering boxing for, since the inception of our website, and we get this a lot. Where people are like, well, how do you get paid? How do you do this regularly? Like, how do you turn this into a career? And it's hard to answer that because it's a sport unlike the NFL or NHL or whatever. There just aren't as many paid slots as there are in those because it's not as big of a money-making machine as it is. And again, there's more moving parts. But I wanted to ask Michael, what do you think is the future of reporters or written content? Because we see this not only in sports but in America in general, where written press, you used to have local, I'm a little bit of a historian myself, and there used to be local newspapers everywhere, and now it's dwindled down to where you really just got the big guys on the coast. You've got CNN and Fox and all these others, and it's becoming a smaller and smaller market. What do you think the future of reporting is? Where do we go from here? What happens? What is the next Boxing Monthly? Is it just a website? Is that all it is? Is there something else to do?
I think that, you're going to find more and more media on platforms like YouTube. But unfortunately, what's going to happen, look, there was a few guys in boxing who jumped on YouTube about 10 years ago. Guys like Marcos Villegas, who does Fight Hub, and a couple others that have big followings. There's a couple of boxing/MMA YouTube channels that have major followers. I'm talking 1 million subscribers or whatever. And that's done. Those guys are it. There's no one else is going to get to that who came afterwards, right? Because there's only so much of a market share there. But what you have now is the corporate entities have figured out that's where media is going. So you're seeing CNN, Fox, those companies, Disney, which is with ESPN, right? Utilizing those platforms more. And the more they do that, the more they kick smaller guys like myself off. And we get pushed further down because YouTube, Google, they manipulate the algorithms to help those corporate-backed media platforms and their channels and boost those guys up. Plus, they have funding for advertising and all that. So you're going to see more of it go on social, because, like you said, there's less and less on TV that people are watching. Like, I can't believe local news still exists. It's crazy to me that it still exists. If you want to know what the weather is, you don't have to watch the Weather Channel anymore. You don't have to watch your local news. You just get on your phone and it tells you what the freaking weather is, and it's just as accurate. And it's instant. Like boxing media. Okay, let's stick to boxing. There's no such thing as breaking news anymore. You see, like, a guy like Mike Goodpaster is always sources. He's always trying to break stuff, right? And sometimes he's right, sometimes he's wrong. The thing is, as soon as a fight is official, the fighters or the promoter, the network, whatever, announces it in 5 minutes later. Literally 5 minutes later, it's viral. Everyone knows because it's on social media. So do you really need a site to break it down for you and give you that breaking news? How many people are clicking on that? When you can go to Twitter, let's say Canelo Golovkin, when the third fight becomes official later this year, I might do a piece on ringtv.com, right? And I'll put a piece up there, but it's not going to be posted for at least an hour after the news has broke on Twitter. So how viable is that? How much longer can we keep that up and continue to get ad space on our site? It's a tough one, man. I do think that a few magazines will hang around because there's something nostalgic about having that printed material, that packaged media. So I do think a couple of them will stick around. I think Ring's going to stick around. I think Boxing News in the UK will stick around, but not many more than that. And I think most websites will eventually dry up because it's like anything else, man. 90% of the sites out there, they're not getting enough traffic. They're not making any money.
Yeah, because we can look back over the last 5 years of how many sites we've seen that tried to come up and start talking shit to us, and then before you know it, they're gone.
Yeah.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, and writers themselves. I mean, because sports doesn't pay well. I mean, I don't know how many guys we've seen come and go just in general. I mean, just in the half decade we've been doing this. But I wanted one other thing too, because since we're on the topic of journalism, what can we do to inject more critical journalism into the sport? Because I pay attention to politics, but I'm not all over it. And in fact, I've kind of distanced myself lately because with this COVID-19 stuff, all I'm seeing all the time, that's why I'm not on Twitter that much. It's like, it's either Trump this, Trump that, or it's COVID-19, or it's some mythical matchup on boxing. I mean, it's driving me nuts here. And so I keep the jab out there. I gotta keep that stuff at a distance. But the thing that I've noticed with other avenues like politics, for instance, is there's a healthy amount of investigative journalists who are doing work, keeping people in check, exposing lies and fraud and corruption and all that other stuff. How can we inject that culture into boxing, which sorely needs it?
I stop clicking on clickbait, but that's never going to happen. I mean, more and more sites, I won't name any sites, but you guys know some of the sites I'm talking about. Are more and more sites are posting clickbait rumors and that kind of shit because it's what generates clicks. It's what people are interested in. I've done videos on my channel really, really detailing and breaking down drug testing and, the half-lives and cycles and how all this stuff works and nuances between all that stuff. I might get 1,000 clicks. If I just did a video this weekend about Floyd Mayweather's daughter, it'd have 20,000 clicks right now. But I don't like to do that kind of work. So I don't do videos like that. I don't write articles about that stuff. But there's plenty of other people that do, including on ringtv.com. We have guys on there, particularly younger guys, who write that kind of stuff all the time. And they get paid for it. I just don't like doing that kind of work. I feel like when I do some hard-hitting stuff and I really lay it on and kind of go after people, and it's not that I'm trying to catch them, it's that I'm just trying to talk about the truth and get down to something, to the truth of something, I'm punished for it. My phone doesn't ring for a month or two. And, other people are getting the gig that do puff pieces, and I don't want to call out too many names, but you mentioned Kevin Aioli. If you just read what Kevin Aioli does, and I like Kevin, he's a nice guy, but everything's a puff piece. Everyone's awesome. Everyone's great. Everything's outstanding all the time. There's no investigative journalism because if he does that, he's going to get cut off. There's only so many paid gigs, and guys like me that try to be objective and tell the truth about things, beyond, I get called racist, sexist, this, that, by certain people all the time just for telling the truth, and that goes in all directions. But, look, promoters have the access, man, and they can cut that access off any time. When Floyd Mayweather fought Manny Pacquiao, Doug Fisher was not invited to cover that fight. Doug Fisher is one of the top, I would say, 5 boxing writers on the planet, in my opinion. I'm not just saying that because I work for him. I wanted to work with Doug. He's awesome. But Floyd Mayweather and that side did not want him there. And I know for a fact, Steve Kim wasn't allowed. There's several other people. I didn't get into that fight. But there are guys credentialed to that fight that have what's the word I'm looking for? Not even subscribership. They wrote for newspapers that have a circulation of less than 1,000. But they were friends of one particular side of the promotion. So they were brought there to cover that event. That's the kind of shit that needs to stop. But how do you stop that? I don't know. Yeah.
So I would just input a few things. And it's funny because I'm not that active on Twitter. So I actually see you're actually quite popular on Twitter, Michael, which is pretty funny because I follow and they follow me. I've got people who follow me who are not fans of yours. So I see some of the criticism of you. And it's funny because if you were to take some of these people's opinions at face value, you would think that Steve Kim, you and Dougie Fisher are like propping up. You guys are like the faces of white supremacy in boxing. And I'm not good at math. I'm serious, man. And I'm not good at math, but I'm like, hold on, that shit doesn't add up, man. I'm not quite getting it here. And maybe some of them think this is a Klan meeting. I don't know what the hell, but
Yeah.
But the thing I would say about investigative journalism in boxing and its lack, really it seems like we all just wait with bated breath for Thomas Hauser to put out a piece. That's honestly what it feels like. What I would say, and this is the one thing that I gather from the New York Times and CNN and Fox, some of the people who, again, they are obviously click driven as well because they're beholden to the ad revenue. I get it. That model, I think, needs to change. I've heard intelligent people talk about it. A lot of people are unsure of where we go from here. Like, how do we stop it? How do we, try to get more critical stuff to the top and in people's eyes? My thing would be this is, if you want to do critical and investigative journalism in boxing, break the big stories. It seems like in politics, you get a healthy round of applause and a nice pat on the ass if you're the first to break a big story, right? Like the Panama Papers stuff. For me, if you want to do it in boxing, do that level of stuff. Scratch under the surface, get all the dirt you can, and release something like that. And I think that's something that could get the ball rolling. But of course, the sport being a fringe one and not many people, a lot of people who cover this sport don't go to college. That's the difference too, is a lot of people don't go to college to be boxing journalism. So it's going to be it's a tough one and it's hard to solve. But I would just say, do the real tough stuff and maybe that might encourage, other guys to do it as well. Again, I don't have a lot of answers. That's just my input.
I appreciate it, man. Look, trust me, I do. I try. Look, you mentioned Thomas Hauser. He did it. He did that piece on IV Gate with Floyd Mayweather, right? Before it was after the fight with Pacquiao, and that was a big deal. I mean, if a scandal, quote unquote, broke like that in the NFL or Major League Baseball, SportsCenter would be all over that. That'd be a big, big thing. Nothing came of it. I mean, Thomas Hauser did that article. People talked about it. I know Floyd's team, I think, threatened legal action or whatever. But do you think Thomas Hauser is ever or would ever get hired by any platform in boxing? Never. This guy will never be on DAZN, ESPN Plus, Fox, any of it. Do you think he'd ever get credentialed to a Mayweather fight if Mayweather came back? No, of course not. So, he can kind of sit on the sidelines and do an article every now and then, but he's in a position where he can do that. He doesn't need the money. How many people – here's what's crazy, dude. How many people read Thomas Hauser's piece on IV Gate versus how many people clicked on TMZ this weekend to learn about Floyd Mayweather's daughter assaulting some YouTuber guy or whatever? I don't even know what the hell happened.
I didn't even hear about that. It wasn't Charlie Zelnoff, was it?
No. This was Yaya is her name, and
Yaya.
I don't know all the details. Somehow that's.
Well, you know what? Our world has come to the point where the biggest trending thing right now is WrestleMania.
There you go.
That's where we are.
And right below that in small letters, coronavirus, U.S. death toll surpasses 9,000.
Good times. 2020.
Yeah. And the bad thing is you could see all kind of watch parties people are having on their, you got like 8 grown men all watching this with their buddies on the phone.
It's amazing, man. Look, man, me and my fiance watched Tiger King over the last couple of weeks. And that's not the sort of thing I would normally watch. I don't know if you guys saw that on Netflix, but there's a lack of any quality entertainment out there right now. We ended up watching it. I'm like, holy shit, what's happening? I'm watching reality show crap on Netflix.
I've heard people talk about that. What the hell is that anyways? I'm still on season 3 of Ozarks.
It's a very, I don't want to give away too much, but it's a very flamboyantly gay dude who ran a zoo, a gay redneck who loves guns, and sang country music songs and ran a zoo.
This shit sounds like my kind of gay guy.
And converted a couple of straight guys to be gay because he gave them meth.
I'll tell you, not to sound homophobic, but not all the meth in the world.
It's definitely interesting.
Okay. All right, Michael, you want to tell everybody where they can find your show? You going to be on tomorrow?
Yes, I'll be on tomorrow. In fact, I'm going to be on tomorrow with a guy who runs a gym here in Atlanta, a guy that I've sparred a lot with, a guy who's punched me in the head a couple hundred times. His name's Marty Hill. He is the chairman of USA Boxing Masters Division. So I'll have him on tomorrow. But, everyone, you can catch my stuff really any platform. It's just Montero on Boxing, Montero on Boxing. I am pretty active on Twitter. That's the one social media platform that I stay pretty active on, so I have a pretty good following there. Find me there and on YouTube. All
right. Thanks a lot, Mike. And we definitely need to do this again instead of waiting a couple years. Yes. I had a good time, fellas. Stay safe, and we'll do it again soon. All right. You guys stay safe down there, too. Jeremiah, you want to tell everybody where everybody can find you on Twitter?
Yeah, if you want to find me on Twitter, it's @GriffosHanky. My preference is Facebook. Just type in my name. That's where I'm most active. But you can find me all over the place. I mean, I'm not only on Twitter and Facebook, but I'm on, Tumblr. I share stuff there, all over the place, but mostly Facebook. All right. You can follow me @Grueling Truth. You can hear all of our shows
everywhere you hear podcasts, including iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Rockfin, you name it, we're there. So for now, for Michael Montero, Jeremiah Preisser, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.